Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Robin Shepherd.
So I'm at the far end, yeah? Okay, thanks. Hello, everybody. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be back here in Prague with Globsec. As you can see from your program, this discussion is about propaganda alliances, whether they exist or not, or whether they're marriages of convenience, particularly in the sphere of information between Russia, China, Iran, through three very different kinds of tyranny, but they share in common an opposition to freedom wherever it is in the world. And we'll be exploring the questions of whether these regimes complement each other, reinforce each other's narratives, how they differ, where perhaps we have blind spots in terms of whether we fail sometimes to recognize what they're doing, and the extent to which we can fight back. And I'd like to welcome on this panel, please, three very distinguished guests today. The first up is Mikhail Khodorkovskii. Welcome, Mikhail. Mikhail is the co-founder of the Russian Anti-War Committee. He's based in London, and Mikhail will be even though he speaks very good English, but he's far too modest, and he will be speaking in Russian and listening in English, and you will have your translation kits with you, and you can't go wrong because there's only one channel, and it's channel 1. So when Mr. Khodorkovskii speaks, please turn to that. My next guest on this panel is Maziar Bahari, publisher, journalist, filmmaker, IranWire. He's also based in London. Very good to have you here, Maziar. Maziar will be speaking in English, not Persian.
Not Persian,
and
no.
Since I...
a bit of Russian, but not Persian.
Since I live in the United States, I'm both an American citizen and a British citizen. I'm aware, I don't know what your view on this is, that Iranians, especially in exile, prefer to be called Persians. I don't know what your view is on this.
Yeah, after the revolution, because of the hostage taking, because Iran took American hostages, many Iranian Americans, they did not want to be associated with the Iranian government, so they called themselves Persian. And Persian sounds more poetic and nicer because you have Persian poetry, Persian cat, Persian carpets. Yeah, we can discuss that all. Yeah,
I agree, and welcome to you. And our third guest is Xiao, and I hope I didn't butcher the Mandarin. If I did, it's your fault because you told me how to say it, Xiao. Thank you so much for being here. Xiao is a director and research scientist at the Counter Power Lab at UCL Berkeley in California, which of course is heavily in the news for other reasons right now. Welcome, and thank you very much for completing what promises to be an excellent panel. What I like to do with all subjects, if it's relevant and possible, but particularly on this one, let's start out by assessing the nature of the threat. What is it exactly that we're dealing with? Is it a few drops of poison in a vast ocean of social media? Is it still, even if that is the case, whether it is or it isn't the case, it's still dangerous because these regimes operate opportunistically, and they can sometimes be very effective if they're targeting certain particular items at certain particular windows of opportunity. And then we'll go into the question of the counteract. So first of all, Mikhail, I'd like to ask you, how would you assess the nature of the threat, particularly from Russia, but feel free to speak on the other countries as well? Are we giving too much credit to Vladimir Putin in the sense that, you know, he must be delighted to think that he can puppeteer-like control our narratives? Does he really, or is this just a few drops of poison in a vast ocean of social media?
Well, we do study this topic quite a lot. We pay quite a lot of attention to it, how the Russian propaganda works outside of Russia. And Russian propaganda outside of Russia is quite active. I could list a whole lot of different examples of how Russian propaganda works and where it works, including social media. But unlike the Soviet era. Because back then, the target, the goal of the Soviet propaganda was to spread how great the communism is, to spread the values of the communism, to spread how great the Soviet Union is. Now, the goal of Putin's propaganda abroad is different. The goal is to create chaos and instill conflict. Wherever there is an opportunity to create a conflict inside Western societies, wherever there is an opportunity to create more chaos, that's all the places where this propaganda is present.
People in this world who are sitting and looking to Moscow for a model. There is no Russian model. I mean, if your regime is built around theft and brutalization and mobster-like oppression, there's no... However, there are people in this world, and certainly people in Beijing, that believe that Beijing does actually offer a model. Does that impact upon the way that China spreads its propaganda?
Well, it does. It does. China can say there's Beijing model because there's an economic true achievement, right, in the context of globalization. And China can make that called China model. Not really, any country can learn from China the way that state control every side of society and economically building up that way. However, with the economic leverage and political power, many countries and many audiences listens. And China leverage from the soft power to censorship to threatening, and in a very schematic way. Even right now, you see Chinese TV everywhere, infrastructure, but that's only the beginning. Wait until every Chinese electronic product speak and listen in your own house, on your own body. You're sitting in every Chinese car, collect every single data. Wait until every Chinese app, AI-empowered app, will have this semantic, not sovereignty that's within the China, it's a semantic power that what I call the linguistic imperialism in the AI age is coming up.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, and we'll certainly come back to it. I'm actually doing a book on the digital revolution and democracy, and I use ChatGPT-4 a lot, but I also have tried DeepSeek quite a few times, and it's very interesting. If you ask it a question like, who are the Uyghurs? Is China oppressing the Uyghurs? Very interestingly, it will give you several paragraphs which look exactly like ChatGPT-4 saying, yes, human rights organizations say that China is an oppressive regime. And then within about 4 or 5 seconds, it self-censors and reduces it to nothing and says, sorry, that is outside my scope, let's talk about something else. So the AI is not, because if you understand how AI LLMs work, you can't quite pre-program it. You have to insert a form of censorship after the event to get back to it. Maziar, there's a third kind of tyranny that we're discussing here, which is different from Vladimir Putin's Russia. It is different from Xi Jinping's China. Iran is an Islamist theocracy. Mm-hmm. Does the nature of the Iranian regime affect the kind of propaganda it is pushing? Or like the other two, is it very heavily concentrated on disruption for disruption's sake?
I would say the Iranian propaganda is more similar to the Russian propaganda than Chinese, because China, I believe they do propaganda based on achievements, cooperations, investment, and then propagating based on that. For example, I was in South Africa 2 months ago, I was in Ethiopia about 6 months ago, and in both countries, you see many signs by Chinese companies, Chinese governments saying that this park, for example, was created by the Chinese government or with the cooperation, with the investment of the Chinese company, etc. So in that sense, it's the propaganda, I think, based on achievements, cooperation, investment. But in terms of Russia and Iran, it's propaganda in place of governing, in place of real power. So I was born in Iran before the revolution, and my parents were communists. So I knew a little bit about what was going on in Soviet Union. And at that time, they were saying that there was one KGB agent for each Russian, which is impossible. But the Soviet Union loved to have that image of dictatorship, that every Russian citizen, every person who goes to Russia is controlled. Some people were controlled. Some people were assigned by, 2 people. I was talking to Nathan Sharansky a month ago, and he was saying that, yes, he was assigned 5 or 6 different KGB, but it was not true. In Iran, it's the same thing, that in Iran, the propaganda has replaced real governing. This is a government that has really given up providing the basics for people in terms of electricity, in terms of employment, in terms of environmental issues, etc. But it's become an expert in terms of using propaganda for justifying its rule. And at the same time, because of the Shia nature of the Islamic Republic, they have allies around the region, in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Syria, especially in Iraq and Lebanon. So because of their Shia brethren, those are like a natural allies of Iran, and they use that for propaganda. So I think it's very similar to the Russian propaganda in terms of its sheer propaganda for justifying your rule. It's not like China that they really do something and then propagating it.
Mikhail, you referred to the Soviet past to kind of ground the discussion of where Russia is today in many respects, unfortunately, but also in terms of disinformation. It also strikes me, or at least I put to you, that the Soviet Union was, even though it was economically far behind the United States, when it devoted enormous amounts of effort to certain things, it could achieve very successfully. Most spectacularly, of course, putting the first person in space with Yuri Gagarin, which shocked the Americans that this had happened and then forced them into the moon landings and the space race. Is Russian propaganda a little bit like that, in that if they devote themselves to very specific causes, they can have an effect, whereas a blanket attempt to say our model is better than yours is something that just has no chance of success? But are they strategic in very specific areas, and if so, which ones?
Russian propaganda likes to use the narrative where they say, the West, the only thing they do in the West is that they talk and talk and talk. But in reality, the West is doing the same things that Russia does. This is the narrative that is definitely being used, but this is mostly an inside narrative used in Russia. When it comes to narratives that are projected outside to Western markets, so to speak, here the narratives are different, and it's more about provoking conflicts. We can see that there is quite an active participation of Russian propagandists in various election campaigns in the Western countries. They are very active there. Is it important for them to support one side or the other? No, that's not the main goal. The main goal is to create conflict. So whenever in the West there are conflicts, be they territorial or separatist conflicts or any other types of conflicts, these are the targets. This is where Russia enters, joins the situation to create chaos with the goal to weaken the potential future other party in the potential negotiations. And I think this is the approach that is more destructive than the propaganda used to be during the Soviet times. Because the Soviet Union, what they proposed was a different worldview. Not a great one, but different. But here, conflict is all it is about.
Or translation kits underneath your chairs. Just a follow-up to that. Are there instances of, I mean, it's very hard to say because there's always more than one thing going on at once, where you believe that Russia actually has had a serious impact in a given country, and that may not necessarily be in Europe or North America, it could be in the global south. Do you have in mind any cases that Russia has actually managed to achieve some successes through this strategy?
Well, I cannot say that the effect is as huge as the Western media painted to be, or the politicians painted to be, like they saying that, yes, the effect is significant. I don't think the effect is that significant, but still, there is a certain influence created and being applied. Now we can see it manifest in how various radical forces are growing in power and in popularity in Europe. And even if you look at the previous elections in the USA, that's also symptomatic. Of course, we cannot say that, and I'm speaking about the not the most recent election, but the previous election. And you cannot say that Russia was supporting Trump. That's not what happened. The Kremlin, instead, was preparing to basically drop a bomb into the election by saying that the election was unfair. This was the main goal. And it remains the main goal when you apply it to elections in Romania, in Moldova, in Germany. You know, what just happened recently, I'm sure you followed the situation. But the goal is always the same. Create distrust into the system, into the election system, into what's happening.
Is that a line of intersection with how China operates too, in the sense that, yes, there are differences, as you discussed in answer to the first question, because it's a different kind of authoritarian regime. Is it also the case that sowing confusion and distrust is in China's interests, and therefore it pushes it hard? Or is that something that they've tended to be surprisingly perhaps a little more restrained upon?
It is in China's interest. That's why that Russian propaganda approaches, or even Iranians, are, you know, they are naturally coordinate each other to achieving similar strategic goal. However, the Chinese propaganda, if we're just limited on this word, does it differently. Russian, like, you know, he said, creating distrust. China does that too, but China do it not creating chaos at this point, but rewire our sort of, even in a quiet way, but cooperating, and at a global level, almost under the radar. We saw the part in your face, right? The Chinese TV, English TV, all over the place, and English newspapers and websites. That's only a small piece of it. The larger part of it, through all kind of ways, particularly I mentioned in this, you know, every Chinese electronic products, that, don't forget this, not only to also to the global south, to every developing country too. Remember this, China has a disadvantage in propaganda in terms of Chinese language itself that most of you know, the Western other nations doesn't, you know, not many people access to the Chinese language, and Chinese English language is a relatively limited experience in propaganda. But with AI, remember, with AI, the translation power, the vast crowd sourcing of a more sophisticated and diverse Chinese propaganda and a semantic control approach will come like sea, like tsunami.
I'll come back in a second to this because I was in contact, I met her a couple of years ago as well, with Audrey Tang, who I'm sure you know, Taiwan's former digital affairs minister and now cyber ambassador at large, because they have some very interesting solutions from Taiwan, which I want to come back to. But before I do, Maziar, is Iran... If you didn't know very much about Iran, you would assume that Iran is going to be putting out a lot of anti-Israeli propaganda. Well, it probably does, but is it, there's already plenty of that anyway, does Iran focus, where's the balance in terms of the efforts that Iran puts into information and disinformation? Is it very heavily Middle Eastern and Israeli focused, or is it much broader than that?
No, it's international, and I would say since 1979, with the Islamic Revolution, Iranians have become masters of rehashing propaganda. So they have been rehashing anti-Semitic, Holocaust denial propaganda that originated in the West, like protocols of Elder Zion and stuff like that. Then they've been rehashing Russian propaganda in terms of, like, in the 1980s with the AIDS origin and things like that. And now they are really, sometimes they have paid agents, sometimes they have, as Stalin used to call them, useful idiots who support Iranian agenda because of their hatred of the West. And those people, especially we can say after October 7, they've become, whether wantedly or unwantedly, agents of Iran in terms of propaganda, in terms of anti-Semitic propaganda, in different languages.
So they're essentially ideological sympathizers in the same way that in the Cold War there were ideological sympathizers.
I wouldn't say that they're ideological sympathizers like Hezbollah is ideological sympathizer. They don't like human rights abuses in Iran, but when they see pictures of dead children in Gaza or bombed places in Gaza, they would sympathize with certain parts of Iranian propaganda, and then Iran uses those people in order to justify other things as well. So, for example, when someone sympathizes with the plight of children in Gaza, then Iran uses them in order to justify its nuclear program, which don't have to do anything with each other. You know, people are dying in Gaza. It's very sad. It's a tragedy. But what does that have to do with the nuclear program? But Iran, because of that sophisticated propaganda, because they are spending billions of dollars every year on propaganda, they can somehow merge these two through their agents unwantedly or unwantedly.
Maziar raises a point that I wanted to bring back to you, Mikhail, which is the question of how sophisticated are the people who are doing this propaganda in Russia? I mean, is there like a kind of situation room or a multiplicity of situation rooms where pretty smart people are being deployed for malevolent ends? Or is it very decentralized and some people are just doing it to curry favor and make themselves look good, and maybe if they're a startup of some description in social media? I mean, how is it? Is it very tightly directed from the top? I mean, how does it actually work?
Well, what we observe is that there are many highly qualified people working in the propaganda sector. And one thing that surprises me is the fact that some of these people, before Putin took power, they were quite pro-democratic, or they projected democratic views. But they easily changed sides when Putin came in power. We also see that many narratives are trickling down through various technical means, through organizational means as well. but also through technical means. They're basically spreading and disseminating them. I could list many projects where the same narratives were being spread using specially created accounts on social media by hundreds and thousands of such specially created accounts. And this is one of not too many methods or ways that Russia and China interact that we know of, because we know of very few of them. Because this is a situation where Chinese accounts or networks of accounts are being used to spread Russian narratives or to support the spread of Russian narratives. So there are some very highly qualified, very smart people, and there are huge networks that are interconnected to spread these narratives. That's their main goal.
Let's move, it's a pity we only have 17 minutes left, and I'll come to the audience in a second, so just be prepared to raise your hand. With a short question, you can make a comment, but no longer than 30 seconds, please. Perhaps go to you, Xiao, the question of what to do about it. And I raised Audrey Tang and Taiwan because it's a very potentially quite a hopeful example that around this time last year, a lot of disinformation appeared in Taiwan, and with very sophisticated deepfake AIs that could actually talk back to you. And one of the main people that kept turning up was Jensen Zhang, the chair of and co-founder, I think, of NVIDIA. And what the Taiwanese did was to set up this is Taiwanese civic groups, but also with Audrey Tang playing a leading role, by a process which is itself extremely interesting. But they came up with a whole range of different possibilities, one of which is a process known as throttling, which means you can slow down the connection. Say if Facebook won't take down an ad or something, a deep fake, you can actually slow down the connection so all the advertising revenue goes to Google, for example. Well, what they came up with was something a bit different from that. But perhaps you would take over here, because I know that this is something close to your heart as to what to actually do about this.
That's what I do every day. But so that's using the first word in addition to propaganda. From the Chinese Communist Party point of view, it's weaponized all in this language space and information space. Taiwan is a good example because Taiwan's the same language, Chinese. That's very important. Secondly, Taiwan is a direct target of immediate target. Therefore, weaponize this whole sort of linguistic control and attack, whether the human power or AI is the best example you can see. And that people in Taiwan can tell you how sophisticated it is and how massive this is, far more than now you are sitting in Prague or in somewhere experience. However, one day when you become, including Czech, okay, when you becoming a target for some reason, and when AI can level that language barrier for the Chinese propagandists and operators to do so, because they can, you'll experience how sophisticated it is. Not only diverse of views, they can also pretending your value and reach your audience, and then drop certain key facts at the key critical time. And they can creating conflicts and on your side, on their side, and every side, every different level, every target you can imagine. That's what Taiwan is experiencing at this quasi-wartime.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. LLMs, generative AI, is large language models. And one of the things, because they're based on a quite, it's not actually that complicated, but they're based on deep machine learning. And it's about the probability of the use of language, and that's how they actually work. So translation is extremely, they're very good at it.
And they can do role play.
Yeah.
I can tell, like,
Yeah.
targeting that country's middle class, liberal side, targeting the religious group, targeting the labor. AI will creating the customer that thing, which the Chinese propaganda used to not be able to overcoming those language barrier. Now they can.
Right, and it's also interesting, and I would urge anybody who isn't really up to speed, just download ChatGPT or one of the others and play with it. Reid Hoffman, who was a founder of OpenAI, and I was in touch with him a little while back, and he wrote a book called Impromptu, and he asked a kind of jokey question, like something like, in the opening parts of the book, how many, I don't know, fire code inspectors does it take to change a light bulb? And ChatGPT gave a funny answer. And then, which is what he called his aha moment, he said, answer in the style of Jerry Seinfeld, and it can do it, okay? It can do it. It's very convincing. Are there any questions from the audience? Please, there. Have we got a microphone? There's a lady here.
She's very close, we can't hear her.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your position. I am Irina Tarasova, I am from Ukraine. I am advisor of General Zaluzhny from 2023 and the beginning of 2024, and we worked inside army with our defenders, with propaganda too, with strategic communication. Now we continue work in our NGO as named International Alliance for Human Resources Readiness, and now I want to focus that we have very powerful changes between propaganda, Russian propaganda, and between Ukrainian and European narratives. I think the main changes, and we worked with this, and we have our position about it, it is about values. I think the values, it is the main changes, and the main, I don't know in English, I think changes, okay. Okay.
If you're okay as a Ukrainian saying it in Russian, I'm sure Mikhail will understand.
Okay. And I think the main changes is our values, and if we talk about information, if we talk about propaganda, I think that we can focus and we should focus all together in joining about Russian stealing land, stealing our time for read this information, for react for this information, and so on, and for propaganda in general. And I think Ukraine and Europe together in join, we focused on protect and defense our position, our values, and share it. Thank you very much. It is not about question, it is much about position. And I think that I can talk a few words thankful for AE representatives and AE workers. And I want to add that I think my important and the main question is what can we do now about information readiness in Europe? I think the best practices, the best experience should be joining. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Mikhail, I think that almost takes us back to where we started, and it strikes me about the nature of the regime we're dealing with. I mean, there's barely a person on the planet who believes a word Vladimir Putin actually says. And if there is one person, there's nobody who actually supports his values apart from him and the people around him. In other words, he's almost got to lie about the lying. There's no point in trying to present a Russian model. It has to be, and this is perhaps to get to the core of the modern Russian state under Putin, it has to be dishonest. Because if he was honest, what's he going to say? Yes, I'm a dictator, and how about having a dictatorship in your country? I mean, to what extent, therefore, and coming back to the question about Ukraine, is our best defense to focus in on our own values, our own democratic values, and in a sense almost not forget about Vladimir Putin's propaganda, but strengthen ourselves first, and then he can say whatever nonsense he wants to say, frankly.
I can have a simple answer to this question, which would be yes, of course. But I would like to delve into this topic a bit deeper. So, currently, what is happening in the West is basically re-evaluation of these values, or more precisely, there is a conflict between the values of the old world and the new world. And the core of this conflict can be seen in what the power means in the contemporary world. What is it? How important it is? We should live in a world where power is something important, right? Or should we live in a world where power doesn't mean anything? Or perhaps we need to find a balance between power being everything and power being nothing. I think, or I would like to live in a world where power is not an important argument at all, but I think we won't live to see such a world, at least, the older generation. So I think we need to find a narrative that matches the reality. And currently, we don't have such a narrative. We haven't found it yet. And the people can see it and feel it. Because when you go around telling people power doesn't mean anything, okay, well, does that mean that Europe can spend less than 2% of their GDP on defense? I mean, I think we all understand where this would lead and how it would end. And if we take the stance that power is everything, it means that Putin can do whatever he wants to with Ukraine as long as he has the power and the strength. Now, where is this pragmatic middle ground between these two unacceptable extremes? This is a very important and complicated question.
I agree with Mikhail, and I think what brings together the Chinese, the Russian, and Iranian propaganda together is this propagating chaos and whataboutism, and also questioning order, questioning conventions, and presenting themselves as the alternative to chaos and to the old system. So, for example, when you see someone like Tucker Carlson going to Russia and go to a supermarket, Tucker Carlson, for those who know, he's an American conservative personality. He went to Russia and he went to a supermarket and he said, see, supermarkets here are clean and they're not subjected to attacks by vandals and homeless people, etc., etc. So what they want to do in terms of the Russian and Chinese and Iranian narrative, they want to present Europe and the Western world and liberal world as chaotic. And what is the alternative? Someone like Putin, who can kill his enemies easily, but there's order. Supermarkets are full. There are no homeless people. In China, yes, there are lots of people, clapping hands at the same time in the Communist Party. And in Iran, it's the same thing. So that is, I think, brings all of them together. And in terms of our friend's question about Ukraine, that is the idea that what about, that someone like Zelensky, he is representing chaos. He's representing the old order, but we are the future. We are the alternative.
Yeah, I will bring you in, but I think probably a friend of yours, Lobsang. Lobsang, we only have a few minutes left, so I know you can ask great questions. Can you ask a great and short question?
I'll try. It's propaganda essentially means battle of narrative, right? And then they win through internal validation or external validation. So there's censorship, they control everything. Internal, you can't do anything about the people inside Russia, China, or in Iran. But external validation, right? That's problematic. We could do something. For example, China has banned Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. But the Chinese diplomats, they use all these tools to spread propaganda around the world. For example, when China was imposed 146% tariff, right? There's Ronald Reagan speaking against tariff. The video suddenly came out of nowhere of 1987 speech, which was spread by Chinese, right? Now, every Americans are watching Ronald Reagan speaking against tariff, right? But they don't know the source is Chinese. Now, how can we have reciprocity? You don't allow Facebook to have access, and why should you have Facebook access? Other point is elite co-optation. Right? So they co-opt journalists and intellectuals and politicians, businessmen outside. They speak for this regime, and people inside China or Russia, Iran are watching Americans, Europeans praising, the regimes. That external validation helps propaganda becomes more effective. For example, Jeffrey Sachs sees everything America quite wrong, and everything about China is quite right, And then when Chinese people watch Inside, say, Nobel laureate praising China, and he doesn't speak about Tibet or Hong Kong or Uyghur, Jeffrey Sachs, but he speaks about China's success, and America is supposedly jealous of China. That's why they're imposing tariffs. So how do we tackle this external validation, especially elite co-optation?
Thanks. And I should point out that Lobsang was the leader of the Tibetan people in exile, and he's currently at Harvard Law School, I think.
I would say investment, because I was in another session prior to this session, and a Hungarian journalist was saying that Orban's government spends $1.2 billion every year for propaganda. And Hungary is not a big country. The Iranian government, the Russians, they spend billions of dollars. And at the same time, we see that the American government is shutting down VOA and Radio Liberty. So I think investment is very important. And one thing that Mikhail and I, we were talking before that, is the use of local languages for propaganda. In the past, before AI, it was not possible to address Urdu-speaking, Bengali-speaking, Arabic-speaking populations within Europe or the United States, North America, in their own language. Right now, with the with all the progress in AI, Russia and China and Iran, they can target those people through community channels, through websites, through radio channels, etc., in their own languages, so they have a better understanding of Iranian, Chinese, or Russian propaganda.
Thanks, Xiao, and also this will be your last word, so make it count, and I'll come back to
Okay.
One quick question in addition to what you're already going to say. Is there any mileage, and perhaps I'll also come to Mikhail as your final point, is there any mileage in President Trump essentially saying to the Chinese, we're not cutting the tariffs with you until you stop this propaganda?
Let me say this. Okay, I'll come back to President Trump. Let's say I agree with one that for democracies, we need not only security but defense. We need narrative offense. And this offense is in full power with technology, with ambition, including Europe. Right now, on the AI side, it's only US and China. Europe should catch up. You must. Now let's come back to, well, before I talk about President Trump and President Xi Jinping, let's talk about President Václav Havel. Havel once said, the center of power is identical with the center of truth. And I believe that. The key of totalitarianism is to dissolve the distinction between truth and falsehood. Unfortunately, now look at the United States. President Donald Trump, every day, every tweet, is he dissolving the distinction between facts and falsehood? I think so. And there's many other leaders to do so. There is also a distinction, okay, between Trump and China. That after all, US has institutions, term limits, and can provide meaningful constraints. But in China, when that dictatorship, President Xi Jinping, who actually, by the way, happened to be my childhood neighborhood, so I couldn't believe a neighbor boy become the biggest dictator in the world. The party is a law, the lie is a law. But it's not within just China. Now finally I come to the rising Chinese digital totalitarianism is a true threat globally. And that kind of web of deceptions is more than just filtering the information, but it's really creating a new sort of language world now eventually in every society when China finds it strategically desirable. And that is a threat we must defend.
Right. Mikhail, final word to you. Is there any chance of, I mean, first of all, we've got to get a peace in Ukraine, and that's not even for certain. But is there any leverage about the whole propaganda question that President Trump or the United States can use against Russia, perhaps in exchange for sanctions lifting or something like that? Or is this just fanciful and he'll do it anyway?
Well, President Trump had and still has a great opportunity. In Russia, there are two people who are very popular currently. Number one, it's Putin, and number two, it's Trump. Just a few months ago, I would have said that even Trump is more popular than Putin in Russia. Now, the question is whether he wants to or whether he can use his authority and the opportunities, the possibilities he has to target Russian population, because he has more opportunity there than in his own country. Does he want to use all that to do the right thing, or does he not want to do the right thing? That's the question.
It's the question of whether we have the will. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the panel for an excellent discussion. Thank you. And if you could leave your translation kits underneath your seats, and there's a panel immediately following, and it's also